We do have a program coming up June 9th at the Pyramid Club. And Aden, I would have invited you to join us there. I know it's a tough commute, but we will be in Center City, Philadelphia on June 9th, and we have 8 women authors joining us that evening. Each author is unique and different, but each of them is special and has something really cool to share. So June 9th, I'm going to ask my buddy Darby. Darby, thank you for helping us in the chat and supporting us. If you could, there's a little link I want to give you guys for the event, and also a code to get 50% off admission. There will be some nice hors d'oeuvres. And of course, if you've been to the Pyramid Club, you already know this beautiful view of the city. You can get a glass of wine, and I guarantee you'll make a new friend. So, so meet the author. Any first timers that are joining us, I can't believe it's almost 8 years we've been doing this. Where does time go? But yeah, September, just about 8 years ago, we started this program. With the exception of COVID, we usually get together once a month and have a wonderful, wonderful author. And this month is no different. So we do have a wonderful author, and this is her book, the book on mind training. So Aden is a clinical neuroscientist, an NLP practitioner, a mindset consultant, coach, speaker, and workshop trainer on a framework, the CALM, C-A-L-M mindset system. She has worked with entrepreneurs, women's groups, corporate employee resource groups, and religious establishments to overcome mental roadblocks and achieve their desires, goals, and dreams. And she is going to share some of that information with us today. Please welcome Aden Eyob. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so good to have you here. So as always, I always meet people through a connection now, right? So our connection, Gregory Jerome, introduced us and said, you two need to know each other. We had a great conversation. And so not only did I say, you need to be part of Meet the Author, but I also introduced Aden to a friend, Naji, who has a wonderful podcast, spreadloveio.com. And I think your interview with Naji is just now released, right?
Yes, it's come out yesterday, so I'll be sharing that as well. It was a very lovely conversation we had.
Good stuff. So you're going to have some information today. If you want some more, there's a fresh podcast, hot out of the producer there. So tell me, Aden. So first of all, you wrote this book. I read this book. It's a great book. What was inspiring you to write this book? Because this was work. This took time. What was it that you said, you know what, I got to put this together in a book?
Yeah, no, I didn't really plan to write a book. It wasn't something that was on my vision, but I did have family and friends who were very much like, you know what, you should write a book. And I put it off because the thought of writing a book was just a bit overwhelming. But I must say, like 4 years ago, and I will share this journey on why I wrote the book in my presentation, I had an epiphany, and it was very clear to me that I needed to share my story because it can help somebody else on that journey of how to overcome mental blocks, deal with emotional trauma, and really build resilience. And it would be unfair for me to keep that knowledge within and not share it. But also it was a way to heal as well. And I think there is something therapeutic about the act of writing. And so it sort of benefited me, but it's also benefiting those who are able to read and take the nuggets of wisdom in there, and as well as the mindset principles. So really it was down to an epiphany that I had, that I needed to overcome my fears of being an author and sharing my creative work with the world.
Yeah. I love the inspiration that you give there. I think some of us haven't written our books for a number of reasons, but I love that you say it would be selfish of me not to share. Mm-hmm. You know, it's almost like the universe has given us some message, some experience, something that we've learned that is so valuable, and we need to share it. And clearly that comes through in your book. So who's the audience for your book? Who should read this?
So yeah, these are the visionaries, the leaders who sort of hit a mental fork road in the road and sharing their divine wisdom. So this book is for them. It's also for people who've endured emotional trauma and really just are unable to use the past trauma to use it to their advantage. This book kind of gives you an overview of various ways to overcome that, and as well as really if you're seeking sort of mindset tools and tips on mindfulness practices on how to really shift thinking, and I'll share that as well in my presentation deck as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you know what? I don't want to hold you back from your presentation. I have more questions for you. Well, why don't I turn it over to you so you can share with us this message, and then we'll come back, we'll do more questions. Folks that are in our audience, as you come up with questions, you can just put them in the chat room, and then we will get back to them after the presentation. Awesome. All right,
Wonderful.
let's go.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Wonderful. So Teresa, you've done a lovely job at introducing me. Just to give you a little context, so I actually have about 10 years of business experience, mainly through healthcare work for some of the Fortune 500 companies, Gilead, Kite Pharma. And so I spent a great deal amount of time in the healthcare remit. I'm a certified NLP practitioner, background in neuroscience and psychology, and I've received some awards in regards to my contributions to mental health from Brains Magazine, as well as awards from my prior company for my ability to balance pressures of life and also be impactful to my peers. So this is just a little profile about me. When I'm not doing all of that, I really thoroughly enjoy traveling, sailing, hiking, and getting the arts and craft, because we also have to be creative. And that also helps as an author, or if you're an aspiring author, making sure you tap into your hobbies really comes as a source of inspiration. And so part of what I do is my medication. So I'm an entrepreneur, and my medication essentially supercharges your executive team. So before I was doing mindset consulting, coaching, and I've sort of geared it now to really helping high growth startups from having a poor management team, lack of focus, and pressures of constant change, to really running an organization that feels like a well-oiled machine. So there's enhanced communication, performance, confidence, and interconnectivity. And so with that, the services I offer are consulting, motivational speaking in terms of entrepreneurship, building resilience, mindset overall, and then I do editorial services, so editing, ghostwriting, as well as writing for a host of publications, which I'll share. And that was due to actually having a book released. So they came about because of that. So a little bit about the book on mind training. So really this book provides the spiritual and mental playbook on how to overcome obstacles. I tell this through a story because stories are relatable, and it also gives context. So I give examples, and I kept it very raw for a specific reason, because I believe in the power of authenticity. And so with that, you're not only getting a memoir story, but you're also getting the practical tips based on neuroscience and psychology principles on how to really shift. So if you find yourself in any of those scenarios that I've presented, there's also answers on how you can move the needle in that regard. And so it really does offer healing, hope, practical mindset training tools and habits, again, to really harness any unhelpful thoughts, beliefs, emotions, value systems you've been ascribing to, and really help you shift that and have a different perspective. So I'm going to share a little video about why I wrote the book, and I think that will also give you a little bit more context, Teresa, and everybody else who may be watching this, of what really inspired me to do this.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Aden Eyob. I'm the clinical neuroscientist and author of the book, Mind Training, The Secret for Positive Living. But it wasn't always like this. From the age of 6, I had big dreams. Dreams to be my own boss, dreams to build my own mental health center, dreams to free my family from poverty. However, I heard no. Everyone told me it was impossible, but I held a flicker of hope. I then had an epiphany to find my way to my why. My why is to share light and love to your unheard voice, dreams, goals, and desires. This in turn led me to establish my medication, a neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality-based mindset consulting, coaching, and speaking service that helps you to uncover your why, unlock potential, and free limiting beliefs to achieve the impossible. My inspiration for writing the book on mind training, The Secret for Positive Living, was really threefold. Initially, it was to heal all the trauma and baggage that I had carried, all the limiting beliefs that I had, and use that as a platform to really turn limitations into possibilities. And secondly, it was really to provide you with a spiritual and mental playbook on how you can overcome limitations. And thirdly, to really just empower you to see and feel and think bigger and to use your voice to activate change, because ultimately you are responsible for your outcome. And by reading this book, you not only learn about my story, but practical ways in which you can take charge of your life and take control of your mind. Remember, your thoughts plus emotion equals behavior. So you are in control of your thoughts and therefore in control of your emotions and your behavior. So grab a copy today on Amazon, and as a bonus, you will get a gift on my website. Do not forget.
All right, so again, I think kind of sums up why I wrote this book. So if you really find yourself being a dreamer or visionary and you've got this book that you want to share with the world, and this book will help you to do that. Oh, we don't want to play again. That's not all right. So, which leads me to sort of like the creative writing journey, how I went about writing the book on mind training. And so I'll cover briefly about the creative journey, but as well as publication process that I went through. And this can also be sort of insight for you if you're considering this, and then we can wrap it up with some Q&A. So to start off with is, where do you begin, right? A lot of the times there's a book in your mind, but where do you start? So the creative writing process is really a journey that requires patience, grace, and open mind, and that willingness to be vulnerable with your creation, especially if you're going to be writing a memoir or anything relating with your own personal story. There is that degree of vulnerability that is required of you. And so that makes it as authentic of a story as possible and to connect. And also just taking that time to explore your why. Like, why are you writing this book? What's the passion behind this before you put pen and paper? And the reason I suggest this is that if you're just writing a book without really thinking about the reasons behind it, it's not a real reflection of your work in a way, at least in my perspective. But when you take time out to really explore your why, and one of the tools that really helps is doing sort of a mind mapping exercise, is like, what is this book about? And then map that out. And then that really allows both hemispheres to really engage and open up ideas that probably had been locked away in the subconscious mind to surface. And so you're giving yourself this free creative roam to explore what your book is about without that limitation of, oh, well, this may not be aligned. So it really gets rid of that analytical mind. And you really want to do that at the beginning. And so some of the creative processes I recommend as a guide is really doing some research. So start to really ask yourself, okay, what kind of book do I want to write? And then start reading up blogs, start connecting with writers community to really understand your book before you actually write it. And then pre-writing, or should I say dictation. So this is the thing. A lot of people think that writing is really about you sitting down and typing. But the key, and a lot of authors, celebrities, athletes, they tap into this tool, is dictation. So 30 minutes of speaking is approximately 5,000 words. Thus, using dictation makes sense as opposed to typing and then hitting that writer's block, right? And so you really want to use the power of dictation to get the initial thoughts out, and then you can employ transcription services, for example, rev.com, to really get that to a professional degree. And what that does, that is really helps you to clear writer's block, but it gives you speed, and that's really important, especially in the writing journey where you may find yourself looking at one word and getting stuck there for a few hours. But when you're dictating it, it's in a flow state. So you're able to really tell the story with ease. And so I really encourage you to use that dictation form. And then drafting it to make it better. And so with drafting, it's really about making sure you're doing it better, not necessarily correct. And correct is really when you apply sort of the professional services of an editor, proofreader, to really look at it from a different perspective, from a professional angle, to then tweak it. And so don't confuse the draft with the editing process. They're two different things. And so these are some of the recommendations. And I think in terms of like going about writing your book, one of the things to keep in mind is not to really name your characters first. And this is just a personal recommendation, because when you do that, you create mental blocks on how that character should be. But when you're just free flow writing, the character will form in its own natural state. And so this is something I'd really recommend, but also finding spaces to write. And so there's obviously retreats. So for those of you who are able to do a book retreat, that's the best way to really remove yourself from the environment, your day-to-day environment, and place yourself in an environment that is conducive for you to write and invoke those emotions and stories you want to tell. If that's not possible, there's always alternatives, and that could look like blocking out time in your calendar for creative writing, or blocking out days. And then leveraging spaces. So ask yourself, what am I bringing into this book? What emotions, what thoughts do I want to invoke? And then finding the spaces that will allow you to create. And I'm sure the Pyramid Club, I haven't been there, but from what I've seen, I'm sure that will be conducive for writing. And so thinking about the type of book you're writing, is it a business book? Is it a memoir? And then what are the spaces that will allow me to really bring these ideas and flourish them and flesh them out? So really think about your days and how you spend it. If you can go on a retreat, that's the best way. If you can't, you can create retreats within your own environments, just being very intentional that you shift gears. Okay, so with that, I'm going to talk about sort of like the publishing process that I went through. So a publishing house. So what is hybrid publishing? Because that's the route I took. It's essentially a publishing house that operates with a different revenue model than a traditional publishing, while keeping the rest of the practices pretty much the same. So in essence, a traditional publisher publishes through the sales of the book and the other related materials, whereas when you're employing the hybrid publishing, that comes from the book sales and fees charged for the execution of the publishing service. So the key difference is that as a traditional publisher, they take the initial fees. They're taking up the cost, right? And then you pay back and not getting much in royalties in other ways, and the creative rights get taken away. But with a hybrid publishing, I give up that initial cost of like between 5 to 20K, and then they do what's necessary. And so there's 4 types of hybrid publishing. So there's the traditional publishers who basically have been brokering hybrid publishing. So in essence, that means that the author pays for the partial cost for higher royalties. And then there's the partnership publishing model, which is the one I took. And that in essence is really, I fully absorb the initial costs in return for higher profits. So with the way I went about it, I have higher royalties, but then I also had to pay a considerable amount at the beginning.
Yes.
So there's pros and cons here. And then there's also the agent assisted publishing model, which is basically that authors are published under the agent's imprint. And that's maybe due to like a lack of distribution method model. So for example, Curtis Group, the Curtis Brown Group is an example of agent assisted publishing models. And then there's other assisted publishing models, although I'd be cautious about that. You really want to do your research if you want to go down that route. And so Raymond Aaron was the program I used for my publishing and hybrid. And I, in essence, did a pros and cons analysis. Initially, I wanted to do a traditional publisher, but then I realized I don't want to give up my creative rights. That's very important to me. But then I'm not also okay with 5 to 10%, or if I'm lucky, royalties. And so I had to ask myself, what's important here? And then by the time the book was about to be released, COVID had happened. And so really what I wanted the traditional publishing route for was no longer necessary because of the state that we were in. And so it just made sense to carry on with my hybrid publisher and just publish and have it just as an online format. And so I really encourage you that when you're thinking about the different types of publishers, do your research, do a pros and cons analysis, and really sit and ask yourself what's important to you. The whole traditional route may seem lucrative or alluring, but the reality of it is there's still cons with that. And so you've got to really be willing to go down that process. And it's a lot more work because you probably need an agent to really do the proposals for you, and you're going to get a lot of rejection, but you can get rejection with the hybrid process as well. So there's a lot more to consider when you're thinking about the different publishers. And if you go down the hybrid or even self-publishing, that doesn't mean your book is any less. It's just, what are you willing to forfeit and what you're not? So another model to also consider is crowdfunding. And this is something I did. So I started off with my hybrid publisher, and then halfway realized, I'm not sure I want to go with you guys. I want to explore my options. And so I went down the crowdfunding platform. And so one of the best ones that I personally have used is Publishizer. And so in essence, Publishizer is a book crowdfunding platform and literary agency that matches authors with publishers, and publishers meaning both traditional and hybrid in this case. And how it works in essence is that authors write a proposal, and then readers pre-order copies, and then publishers express to contact authors. And at the end of the 30-day campaign, the author receives a range of offers if you're lucky, and selects the publisher that they desire to use, or then decides, I don't want to work with any of them, and can self-publish. And so the really good thing about the crowdfunding platform was, one, in particular, that they were a very supportive team. You get that kind of assistance, and then you have an opportunity to be a featured your book featured as an opportunity, as you can see here. And so that really opens up the possibility to being tapped into the traditional publishers. So the more feature my book gets, the more access I may have to a traditional publisher or a hybrid publisher. And then also just having that ability to have a structure, I think, was important with the crowdfunding platform. The downside, again, is there's a really short campaign period. So you have 30 days to really have an excellent campaign that's going to get all these pre-orders, hit the milestones, and then access the hybrid. So each milestone determines how much or how many hybrid publishers or traditional publishers you will be able to tap into. And so that campaign has to be really good for you to be able to get as many traditional and hybrid publishers as possible in 30 days. And also another thing to keep in mind is that Publishizer does take a percentage fee. And so you've got to factor in the cost of that and make sure you're not out of pocket. And then the pre-order fulfillment is at the author's expense. And so I'd say, I think from my experience, I probably, if I had to do this again, I'd really reforecast the costs so that I'm not at a loss here when, Publishizer takes their cut and then I still have to fulfill the pre-orders. Because what happens is, let's say you get a traditional publisher who's shown interest, or a hybrid, and you want to go with them. They're not concerned with your pre-order fulfillment. That's on you. That's something you agreed with Publishizer and yourself. And so they're only concerned with the contract moving forward. And so when you're doing this, if you decide you want to do crowdfunding, keep in mind the cost of, like, will you have enough after the cut has been taken? Will you have enough with the shipping and handling? Because when I started this book, I was in the UK and I wasn't really thinking I'd be coming back to LA. And so a lot of my readers were based in Europe. And so there's shipping costs there. Mm-hmm. And so really think about and have different models of this if you decide to pursue this route. But I think it's a great route. And if you especially are confident in your power of your networks, because this is really leveraging your networks. The pre-orders are coming from people in your network who are willing to invest in you and their networks. And so if that's an area you think you're pretty confident in, I really encourage you to explore the crowdfunding. So another thing to consider as well is, like, okay, having your hardcover book is great and everything, but you also want to have an ebook. And the reason for that is you want to capture readers who are digitally savvy and prefer paperless approach. And so Publisher Method that I took, they directly deal with Amazon, thus the Kindle publishing was managed through them. But if you decide I'm going to do this myself, you've got to consider, do you have the time bandwidth to manage the logistics that goes into having a Kindle set up? The benefits of this, if it's professionally managed, is a Kindle publishing process. You get an account manager. They deal with all things related to Amazon. And then every month you get a report. And then if there's money for royalty payouts, you get paid. So it's not having that stress of chasing Amazon, chasing inventories and getting queries. All of that is managed through the hybrid publishing process. Alternatively, like I mentioned, you can self-publish ebook via Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. The key KDP features, you don't get charged to upload the file on Amazon. The only thing is you have to factor in costs for the EPUB file, but that's very minimal. And then author royalties can vary between 35 to 70% of the sell price. So depending on whether the book is sold on KDP or through another Amazon service provider called KDP Select. And then obviously when you have Kindle, Kindle, your reach is bigger because everywhere it's a global reach, right? So you really do, I'd encourage you to, if you're gonna write a book, obviously have a hardback or paperback, but then have a Kindle as well, because you want to reach out to as many people and their preferences of reading as well. And then thirdly is really Audible. And this is something I'm in progress with the book on mind training, which the Audible feature should be coming out Q4 of this year. And why Audible is important is you want to capture also the auditory based learners and readers and those who prefer to listen on the go. So not everybody wants to read a book, wants to feel the book or just visually read it. Others prefer to absorb information through the auditory modality. And so to really make sure your reach is big, and let's face it, with busy schedules, Audible has become the best way to really get as much content as possible without too much stress. And so Audible is the audiobook service provider from Amazon and the gold standard for audiobook publishing. In terms of the Audible process, things to consider is that Kindle on demand setup is needed. And in order to do that, you need an ACX account. And in essence, you need to have that linked to your Kindle. So what that really means is if you decide to do an Audible, you actually have to have a Kindle version of your book and then connect it. And that's done through the ACX platform, and you have to meet their standards. And this is pretty much the gold standard and where Amazon Audible works with ACX. And the good thing with this as well is you also have access to professional voiceover artists. So if you decide, no, I don't want to narrate my book, you have access to that. So depending on the different price brackets that you want to pay, you can get a voiceover artist to do your book for you at a professional quality. But things to consider with this approach is, do you want to narrate it or get it done professionally? Then the costs for audio editing, narration equipment, or professional hire fees are things to consider, as they can get costly, especially if your book is big. And I think for me, that was thing. But the standard book, it should be okay. But if you're thinking to write a very dense book, this is also something to consider, as especially with the professional fees can get higher the bigger your book volume is. And with that, I'm going to just mention some of the awards and opportunities that came about as a result to writing a book. So I see books as really the CV. It's your CV. And but also it brings about opportunities for writing. And so some of the things I got by writing the book on mind training, The Secret for Positive Living, was opportunities to write for a host of publications. Namely, so I'm an opinion columnist for CEO World magazine, which is the world's leading business magazine. And it's written for CEOs, by CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, board directors, executives, investors, and business leaders. And I talk about mindset, business mindset in that regard. And I'm also a senior executive contributor for Brains Magazine, which is a global digital magazine covering about business, mindset, leadership, innovation, and lifestyle. Again, this came about because I had the book, and they reached out to me and wanted me to write. So this is it's the benefits I'm mentioning of writing your books here. And then I'm also a guest writer for The Voice newspaper, which is a UK newspaper committed to campaigning on issues such as entrepreneurship, social enterprise, social mobility, education, racial injustice, and so forth. And then I've also been writing for various blogs, namely WinTrade Global, which is a women's business network, and then also for the Collective UK, which really is a co-working, co-living space in the UK for startups and creatives. And then obviously, when you have a book, you get opportunities to be invited to podcasts, as we mentioned earlier, as well as speaking engagement. So it really does open up the doors for many opportunities when you have that book in hand. And then some of the awards, as a result, I got an award from my publisher for Positive Living Through Mind Training Award. And then I was also awarded the Brains Magazine Korea Global Award. I'm just going to show you a brief video, but this is for 2021. So alongside the likes of Oprah and some of these amazing celebrities, I was also listed in that for my medication and also my writing contributions. So that was very humbling.
Wow. That's pretty impressive, Aiden.
Thank you. So write a book, guys.
There it is.
Oh,
And
sorry about that.
this happens to me too, by the way, because when I'm in Zoom, I always got my videos. So you play it, but then when you go to forward your slide, it plays again.
Yeah. Yeah, gotta love it. And again, so another thing that came about from having the book is TV interview. So I did a TV interview for Everybody with Angela Williamson, which was a new show on KLCS PBS that emphasizes diversity within education, the arts, and community. And we talked about the book. We did a deep dive on mindset and how to really shift the needle in that. And that show aired on 4th of January, but it's also available on YouTube. And so this really just goes to show that if you've got a book waiting inside for you to share, just take that first step to do it and make it available, because you don't know what platforms you may find yourself in as a result of having a book.
Nice.
And so one of the things I just want to leave you with a parting wisdom before we do Q&A is this mindset formula, which I mentioned in the video, is just your thought plus emotion equals behavior. And so if you're an aspiring author, think about this. You have the gift, right? But it's the thought that you're programming in, which is affecting the emotion, which is affecting the behavior, and then ultimately your results. So if you're saying, I can't be an author, I can't write, that's the thought you've programmed. And then the emotions that will come about it. And then the result is you won't do it. But if you reverse engineer by saying, I can do this, I'm able, I'm capable, then you're reverse engineering the process so that you're able to write this book. And if it's a case of time constraints, then there's professionals who can support you. There's ghostwriting services like something I do or others who can help you in that process. So it's not impossible.
Thank you for the inspiration, Aiden. And I had asked Aiden to share her thoughts on the publishing process and just how she got this book to where it is. This was far beyond what I ever expected. And I took a lot of notes. Fortunately, we'll have a recording of this so I can go back and look for the websites and the other tools that you had offered. I want to, well, we've got some time left. I'd love to ask you some questions just about you and the book, because
Yeah.
so gang, this is, so I ordered the book, I read the book. Clearly this is my cup of tea. I mean, those of you that know me, this is my cup of tea. So I'm just eating this up like butter. Good stuff. But I want to get some nuggets from that book to share with our audience as well. And so we talk about positive living. What is the secret to positive living? Is there a secret?
There is. And it's also that formula that I've mentioned to you. It's really down to your thoughts. So in that book, I talk about some harrowing examples of things that I had to deal with, but the key was the thought. In all of that, I was always daydreaming or visualizing and telling myself, this is not my environment. I am not made up of this. And so if I had decided to cave into those pressuring environments, then I would be a product of that environment. But by telling myself, I design my life, I decide what I want out of this environment or out of this relationship or out of this work situation, I tell my subconscious mind that this is how this may be what it is, but this is what I see. And now we're going to work together to make that a reality. And it will take time. And that's why the secret to positive living is really the thoughts that you tell yourself. A lot of it is what you say to yourself more than what others say to you. If you start to believe the thoughts that others are saying to you and you echo it back, that is what your subconscious will hear. And that is the behavior that you will manifest out into, and you won't even be aware. And so this is where the secret comes in, is, do you know what you're saying to yourself? How you talk to yourself determines everything else.
And I would imagine during, well, frankly, even if we just look at this last week, the society and our environment doesn't always support a positive mindset, right? It makes it challenging. So help me understand, you work with leaders and organizations. How are you helping leaders during these challenging times?
Yeah, so I do that mainly through sort of my NLP expertise, so the neuro linguistic practicing, which is essentially a fusion of hypnosis, psychology, neuroscience, and it's really action led. And so the idea is that it shifts their way of thinking from where they are to where they want to be. And there's tools that help them to do that. So if it's about the communication, so how they're talking to their team members and their leadership style is not conducive to getting the results that they want, we strategize, we mind map, we do sort of limiting belief exercises that help them to shift that. But then we also do group environments. So if the group communication has broken down, it's about really then having that honest conversation, looking at ways in which the group really communicates on an individual basis. So bringing the I back to the team, because team works when each individual's ways of thinking is also respected. And so as a leader, it's about understanding their team, the emotional acuity that goes to that. But then within the group, it's about understanding the group dynamics, their individual contribution, and then how that could be relayed into how they are willing to be led by their leaders as well. And so the NLP really comes into that. It also comes into overall the framework that I mentioned, the calm mindset system. Getting into a calm mindset is important, especially as a leader, because the reality is constantly there's so much change and decisions have to be made so quickly. And so that really leads to decision fatigue and then emotive based behaviors. And so as a leader, what I come in and my team does is really help them to get in a state where they're calm and they're able to operate constantly from their prefrontal cortex, which is the executive team. And the reason that's important is that as a leader, you're setting the tone. And if the tone is very much based on anger, then that's going to have a negative impact on the performance of your team. And so even if the situation is difficult, the ability to stay in a calm mindset is what's going to be the key to then leading a very productive, high performing teams. And so we walk through those exercises and frameworks. I do recommendations on ways to sort of improve the systems and structures as well.
Good stuff. I'm sure there are other people who are doing exactly what I'm doing at this time. I'm thinking, wow, I know some leaders that could probably use some help, right? We all do. Trying to find a way to stop share screen. I don't know if I can do it. I think you might have to be the one to stop share screen. And that way we can see each other. So cool stuff. One of the components of calm, so we've got CALM. The L is love, right? And this is blowing my mind and warming my heart at the same time, because I work with pharma, you work with pharma, we work with large corporations that are very serious and buttoned up, and yet you have love as a key component of your model. Share with us what is that and how does this fit in? Because I love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I see a question here. What do the other letters mean? So what do each of the letters mean? And then let's talk about love.
Absolutely. So the calm mindset stands for clarity, accountability of goals, love, and motivation. So this is the framework. And then there's NLP, there's consulting, there's a lot of little nuggets that go into each quadrant. But going to love, the reason I've been intentional in putting love is that, in my experience in corporate America and just the business world, that was the part that was lacking. There's a disconnect and this lack of empathy. And empathy is such a powerful tool, and that comes from love, our ability to connect on a human to human basis. And especially in pharma and in these bigger industries where it's very much based on analytical way of thinking, that connection gets distorted. And so that's what we're bringing back. When I say love, is being able to lead from the heart. And that then allows for that healthy communication, especially having difficult conversations, being able to connect. I think COVID has helped us to see the importance of bringing love into the workplace, because when we don't, this is what we get, right? And so the reason why love is important, and it also does look at self-care programs that help you to get into that vibration of love as a leader, but also as an employee. It ultimately helps in terms of making that connection between the subconscious and conscious communication. So you speak the love language that the other individual understands, and vice versa. And then what that does for communication is it smooths it out. There's no misunderstanding. But ultimately, when you take care of yourself as well, then you're able to lead with ease. And so that's where the love component comes in. As in terms of organization, ultimately, the bottom line is important, but that's not it. The bottom line cannot be important if your employees are in distress. And so this is where love is important, is you can still make money while still empowering your team and loving on your team.
Yeah, it's not one or the other.
It's not. They can both work, but it's the mindset that will determine how that is put together.
Wow. The wheels are turning here. So this really is beautiful, amazing stuff. And there's a little bit of it that's kind of like we can't put it on a spreadsheet, but it's really important. So like that whole love piece, it's not like you can bring up slides and be like, look at the love. Here it is here, and here it is. But yet that component is the foundation that leads to things we can put on a spreadsheet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Love is not measurable, but its impact can be measured.
Yes. Yes.
So
So
if you think, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
If you think of just like what we've been through with COVID and the
Sure.
changes like organizations have made, wellness becoming an important facet. Before that was something you just talk about, you bring in a motivational speaker just to like get everybody up and going. But then the next day we're back to reality. But then when it's become part of the system, right? That's the love right there. When you take care of your employees, when you check in on their well-being, it's not just about output. The output comes when all the input is good, right? And so that leads to an employee who feels valued, who will then be willing to do more, go above and beyond, as opposed to an employee who's just churning out results but doesn't feel seen, heard, loved, or cared about in any way by the leadership or the management team. But when that component is understood and each and every team member is respected, not just for their work, but the way they work, then you have a holistic way of working.
Nice. Nice. And I know we had set 12:45 as kind of a wrap up time, but do you have time that I can ask you another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
here's my question. I would love to hear a success story. So obviously no names, but I'd love to hear like a situation with like, this is when we first started, this is where we were, and this is the beautiful outcome. This is the progress. Do you have a story that you can share?
Yeah, so actually this was an individual. So they were a professional NFL player and they've decided that life wasn't going to work for them and they had their own business. And then they were transitioning to a government position within the company. And they were really afraid because they also are a person of color. And so that establishment wasn't very, I wouldn't say it wasn't friendly, but they were essentially the color in that environment. And so then there's also the whole career transition that they had to consider and the mindset that was needed from being a professional athlete to a business owner, doing really successful, leaving that dream behind and then going into corporate America. And so we did consulting to really like mind map that out, roadmap, put the strategies in place, but then really bring in some of the NLP to help that individual with their whole being, but also, for example, how they relate to their team. So the communication that they were using, it wasn't working. And so this is where we strategize and I help them to see their angle without being in that situation. And so they were able to have a better roadmap of how they can hire better, how they can interact with their teams, and how they can get the best out of their teams without it feeling like a tug of war. But then on an individual basis, they were able to get sort of alignment with their personal and professional goals. So a lot of the issues that they were having at home was impacting their way of delivering. And so, and we looked at that and sort of created harmony. And a lot of it boiled down to love. And so creating what I call power habits were lacking that. They didn't have any structure. And so they were just operating from pure stress. And so by building in these morning, nighttime routines, they were able to get in a state where they can just lead better. And then that result was shown in how they were able to hire. They hit all their metrics that the company had set them to do, and then they got promoted into the executive team, and now they have pretty much all the control that they wanted, and they're expanding their division even further, and this is all in a year.
Wow. And you've probably got a bucket full of stories to share, which I mean, that's why we do this work, Aden. You know that there's some things that we found that work in our life, and then you expand it and share with others, and then you see them being successful. It's beautiful. Well, what's next for you? Because I know you're a mover and shaker, and even though this book is great, the work you're doing is great, you're going to continue doing it. I know you've got some other things that you're working on. Let's hear.
Yeah. So a second book. So that will be more the how to mind train. And so that's bringing in the neuroscience and psychology practices on an in-depth basis. So another book coming out, but then I'm also just set up a nonprofit. And this is something that's been very dear to something I've had since I was 6 years old. And so to see that to fruition is become really amazing. And so that's going to be based in Ethiopia initially, but eventually will be an international NGO. But that's really creating healthcare services for Ethiopia and educational resources, because right now 67% I think is under the age of 30, and there's a lot of mental health issues that are not being met. And so where we come in is creating sort of like a global think tank for a local solution in which we bring in the educational resources for the youth to really empower them to be the leaders by getting in control of their mindset, but then teaching them leadership principles that will help them to lead their communities. But also we're developing mental health center and clinic facilities so that those with mental, neurological, and substance disorders will get the treatment that they need. And so that will also look into digital health as well as clinic infrastructure. So we're creating sort of a holistic framework for those who need those services to be able to access it, where finances will not be a problem.
Wow.
And so that's bringing my pharmaceutical background back into the picture with the nonprofit, because we're going to partner with pharmaceuticals, but also bringing sort of a holistic approach to that as well.
So you are making a ding in the universe, as they say. You really are. And I'm so delighted we were introduced. I'm so delighted that you took time out of your day to share with us. Thank you for sharing the journey to getting a book out, which I'm working on one and I'm very close. But thank you for that. And also thank you for sharing some of your story. I truly, those of you that are watching either the recording or you're on live, this really is very, very good stuff. And the work, Aden, that you're doing, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking there is an organization I am going to reach out to this week to make an introduction, because your message is beautiful and I think it's just what they need. So thank you, my friend, for joining us. And I will be out in LA. So you're in LA. I'm coming out in June. We'll see if we can find a way. We'll share a meal.
Yes, absolutely. It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Awesome. Darby, thank you behind the scenes. If we could, in the chat, we'll put some links for if you want to follow Aden. We've got her website. We've got her LinkedIn profile. If you want to follow Meet the Author, we can put those as well. In fact, I think I can just go, boop. There we go. Yay. There we go. Thank you, Darby. Thank you, Aden. And thank you, everyone that joined us. June 9th, I would love to, if you're in or near the Philadelphia area, I would love, love, love to see you at the Women's Author Group. And we'll repost that link and the discount code. Aden, thank you so much. And everyone, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
And have a great, great weekend. Love you all. Group hug.
Bye, thank you. Happy Friday.
Take care.
Bye-bye.